everyone. Thank you for coming and spending your time with us on especially on a lovely afternoon in Seattle on a weekend. Yeah. We apologize for the delay in the talk. So please take a. Hopefully some of you had lunch, or if you have not, please help yourselves with lunch. We have all millet dishes. And then if you can sit, then Kiran will start the talk. So Kiran, a little bit about Kiran Vissa is Kiran Vissa has been volunteering with AIDS since '95. Right?
20 years.
For 20 years now. He wore several hats in AIDS, starting multiple chapters, probably a treasurer, all those, and he's been in the board of directors as well. And in 2007, he moved back to India to work on one of the issues that he's passionate about, which is agriculture. So since he moved back to India in 2007, he's been working on agriculture issues. And then I'll let him talk about his work.
I think you can help yourselves and sit and eat and listen and talk, whatever. So since I'm very glad actually to be back in Seattle. The first time I came here after returning back to India, it was in 2009, and we had a millet lunch, at the time, and it was really lovely because we had just got involved in work related to millets in India, in Andhra Pradesh, in one of the driest districts. It is basically in Andhra Pradesh, it is the driest district, Anantapur. And even if you consider entire India, apart from some pockets of Rajasthan, it's one of the drier places in India. And we had just started working with the farmers there on growing millets. So I was so pleasantly surprised that actually immediately aid volunteers here really took to themselves understanding millets and trying to figure out where to get millets in this local area. I had got some millet from India and then figured out how to make really awesome dishes with millets. So I think that millet lunch in 2009, it was a big success, and this is also symbolic of the way that aid works. In aid, we basically don't look at the work that's happening in India as some projects that we are supporting and we are raising funds here and we send funds there, and basically that is our primary connection. We don't look at it that way. We do support a lot of very good projects in India which make a lot of difference on the ground. But we also think that we are also directly connected in that work. It is not only through sending funds, but we are actually directly connected and we are directly involved in that work. So that's the kind of passion with which aid volunteers work. So, in 2009, I remember in 2009, July, August is when we started off this work on millets. And when I came here in November, already, everybody had owned up the whole millets agenda. I think that's a very good, thing that happens in aid, that people really get passionately involved in what work is happening in India and understanding also the connections with our own lives, that we can make a difference not only through supporting projects, but actually by making changes in our own lifestyle, as well as by contributing directly, even in a non-monetary way, getting involved in the work in India. So I think that is what has led to more meaningful contributions. Somebody like me who was also working as a volunteer here, working in a telecommunications company, because I was very passionately interested in natural resources issues, agriculture, water, how to conserve water, what it means to actually have a sustainable lifestyle, both at a personal level as well as at a macro level. How our food is grown, how our natural resources are protected. So these were all things which I was interested in. And because I was also connected to so many good groups in India which were working on these things, at some point I decided to quit my job here, go back to India and start working on these issues. I think that is the kind of trajectory that that some volunteers have followed. But anywhere on that trajectory, basically our involvement in the work in India only grows deeper, and that is one of the good things about aid. And I think particularly with respect to agriculture and food, we'll be talking about agriculture, the kind of crisis that's happening in India and so on. But I think the starting point is always, the food that we eat. So I hope that all of you enjoyed, the millet dishes which were there, and I'm sure that many of you also prepared and, brought some of the millet dishes. So I wanted to just share a few things about millet. So how many of you are familiar with millets? I mean, before coming here. Yeah. So how many millets can you name? How many millet crops? I mean, we can just have an interactive rather than ragi. Ragi, jonnalu, jawar, sajjalu. Yeah, sajja is they call bajra as sajja in Hindi. Bajra. It's also called pearl millet in English. Korralu, yeah. So korralu also millets, foxtail millet. In Tamil it's called thinne. I think that some of you may be. Yeah.
We have 3 millet dishes today. We have foxtail pongal. We have little millet. It's called sama in Telugu.
Sama.
Sama, yeah. It's called little millet curd rice, and the case is made of little millet. And dosa is made of kodo millet. Arika in Telugu. I don't know the name of in other languages, but
yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, Arika.
Kodo millet.
Yeah, I'm also not. I don't know in Tamil and all what they call it, or in Hindi. But many of these things are also very local. So kodo millet, for example, I think that kodo millet you get in southern India. I'm not sure whether, it is exactly in the same form in northern India. But essentially, there are a whole variety of millets. When we talk about millets, I think the top 3 that come to mind are ragi, bajra, and jowar, which are called the major millets. And then there are also minor millets where the extent of cultivation is comparatively lower. I mean, it's less widespread, and some of them are localized. Korra is there in Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, whereas you may not find it. But Sama is there in Gujarat and some of the northern Indian states also. So these are all also minor millets are also kind of localized crops. But there's a whole rich variety of crops, and the reason it is important for us to actually eat millet food, consume millet food, and also talk about millets is because they represent the kind of diversity that is there in the food. And as we look at the way that our food choices have grown over the years, over the decades, I think that except in the last 5-6 years when there is a revived interest in or maybe 10 years, revived interest in nutrition and so on, over the years, actually the diversity of our food has really decreased. People who used to consume various kinds of staple foods, they've all zeroed in on rice and maybe wheat. So just eating wheat, rather than eating rice itself is just considered as variety. Whereas there are so many kinds of staple grains, which are there in India. So millets are particularly important because they grow well in dry areas. They don't require that much of water. And I heard that Washington is going through a drought this year. California is going through a big drought. In India also, this is actually a big drought year. And in fact, last year was also drought year. So in many states. So actually, 2 consecutive drought years is a really huge disaster. See, when we look at something like a big earthquake happening, or a tsunami, or like a huge cyclone, hurricane kind of a thing, it really hits you because it's something which happens in a few minutes or a couple of days, and then it causes so much devastation. But drought is actually more like a silent disaster, and especially in a country like India, where majority of the people, 55% of the people, are dependent on farming. it is really one of the biggest disasters, and especially if you have 2 drought years consecutively, it's a really bleak situation for the farmers. So that's the reason why we also hear so much about farmer suicides and all happening in the last couple of years. But we'll get into that later. Millets are really important, when we think about drought and when we think about water shortage. Firstly, if you look at the nutrition, we've actually looked at the nutrition content of different millets, how they compare. And you'll find that each of the millets, like pearl millet, for example, bajra, very high in protein, iron. Finger millet ragi is one of the best sources of calcium, and foxtail millet is very good in protein, and and all the millets are actually very good in fiber. So you'll find that each of these millets actually has very good nutrition content. And just now we were talking to one of our friends who's also studied nutrition. So she's also a big promoter of millets. And in fact, if you look at the ones which are really do poorly in terms of nutrition, one is paddy rice, which is actually the most consumed staple in India. And wheat is also good in protein, but in many of the other parameters are actually lesser. So we have some of the most nutritious grains actually that can be grown, also with the least requirement of water. So this is kind of the requirement of water, for these various crops in mm, to grow 1 acre of paddy. So basically you need like about 1200 mm of water. So if you have a 1200 mm of rainfall, during the season, then perhaps you don't need to irrigate and you can just grow paddy. But in most places where paddy is grown, the actual amount of rainfall that they may be getting is only like 500 to 600 mm. So, or maybe 800, 900 mm. So there's a lot of irrigation that is required to grow paddy or any of the other crops. Compared to paddy, if you look at bajra or ragi or any of the millets, it's just 350 to 400 mm of water that is required. So even when the rainfall is very low, even in a drought year, millets can be grown well, and that's the real significance. So our involvement in the whole millets related work started off in 2009, 6 years ago, when there was a similar drought season. By July, actually, the rains hadn't really come, and in Anantapur district, one of the most drought affected districts, they were almost entirely dependent on groundnut crop. So they had sown groundnut crop once, the crop didn't germinate, or it germinated, but all the plants died because there was no timely rainfall. Then sometimes many of the farmers sowed a second time, and even the second time actually it failed. So it was a really desperate situation, and some of us, basically there's a person called Dinesh who we started working closely with. He has been working in Anantapur district for the last 20 years working with farmers. So what we felt is basically that unless we go for real dryland crops, which are much more resilient, and even in a drought season they can actually do well, the farmers will be at a total loss. So with our limited resources and with the support of Aid Seattle and some other chapters of Aid, we started off this initiative to distribute millet seed. In a very short time, within a 1 week or 2 week span, we were able to actually get hold of 22 tons of millet seed, which basically means about 7,000 acres of land. We were able to actually distribute the seed, and farmers were able to sow. And even though they were sowing in the middle of August, they actually got a decent crop at the end of November. So that's a similar situation that we had this time. And I also wanted to just report some progress, from the time that we started at that time. So that year was the initiation of this, large-scale kind of shift and focus on millets. And when we were able to mobilize so much of millet seed and distribute it, we in fact at one of our distribution things, we called the agriculture minister of the state, Raghuvira Reddy, who's also from Anantapur district. He was really shocked that, oh, are these seeds still available? People are still growing these crops. I didn't know. So that's the status. When you look at macro level, actually many of the policy makers and so on, they have really lost sight of this whole diversity of crops that is required, to sustain the dryland agriculture. But it was a revelation, even for the agriculture minister of the state. But this time, just 2 months ago, Again, a similar drought year, and at the beginning of August, we actually had a meeting in Chittoor district where our family is also involved in agriculture, and on the drought situation. And this time, actually, the agriculture secretary of the state, he's quite sensitive to farmers' issues and all these issues of sustainable agriculture. So he came to our village. We had a big meeting. The district collector came, and we were discussing about what are the alternative things that we can do for farmers. And Dinesh also came from Anantapur district, which is a neighboring district. So we had a long drive with the with the agriculture secretary, Dinesh and myself. And another of our colleagues called Mohan. So we basically discussed what to be done in the Anantapur district, because of this drought. So what we had done through a private initiative, 2009. This time actually the government has done it through the, through a government initiative. So because they were through the last few years of concerted work on millets, the government is also convinced now that millets is the way to go. They've introduced that as as the crop recommendation for many of these areas, like Anantapur district, and they have actually mobilized, of course, much larger scale of millet seed for distribution. So in the second week of August this time, they actually held a training for all the agriculture officers, across the state, and they invited Dinesh also to participate in the training and organize this kind of a millet seed distribution. So this time actually much larger, at a much larger scale, millets were sown in Anantapur district. So that way I think that we made a lot of progress.
Yeah, that's wonderful to know.
Yeah.
The small initiative that we started in 2009.
Yeah.
Great to see that.
Yeah.
So because you said it's interactive, I'll just jump in. What he just said, I feel there's a. It is, even though just a statement, it's a hugely significant, and it's also something that I learned after joining AAD, is that when working, you can always make small differences in working on small projects, and they're all important. But if you're able to get government involved, and actually have a project run through the government, the impact of that is much bigger than what you could achieve as an organization, even with $1 million donations that we are able to raise. When government gets involved, impact can be huge. No, it's wide, and $1 million is nothing for government, right? So even though you said that statement, I think to me it's very significant. And that's something that I learned in AID, is that we actually fight with, we as our sister organization, we fight with Indian government a lot, and we do protests and all that. At the same time, we try to make systematic changes within the government, such that the impact like this is seen. That's actually hugely significant.
Yeah.
How recent is this?
Huh?
How recent is this?
No, this has happened this year. I'm talking about August of 2000. So, yeah. So this is also a big drought year in India, but this is actually a trajectory. So I'll just I can fill in a little more dots on how we reached here, right? So after this millet initiative that we started in Anantapur district, there are other, couple of other organizations also which have been talking about millets, like Deccan Development Society and so on. What we decided is that unless we get the government to actually take more active interest in this, we cannot make a large-scale difference. Some farmers we can actually focus on in a few villages or in a few blocks and encourage them, and then they can become models for the farmers around them. But for that to catch on, we actually need a systemic change. That the government needs to prioritize that. So we started doing advocacy work alongside with our ground level work. So that's something that I'll go into more detail also, how the advocacy work helps in our work on agriculture. So we actually were able to get the state government to hold a huge millet mela in Hyderabad through basically push from some of our organization and the like-minded organizations like that. So we were also partnering with them in that. So I don't know if many of you may be familiar with Hyderabad. There's this huge Hussain Sagar tank bund area. So that's the heart of the city basically. So there's a huge open area called People's Plaza there. So the entire area was filled with this whole millet mela that was done by the government. So the Ministry of Agriculture and the Agriculture University, as well as the Home Science College, the government's Home Science College, together did this collaborative thing. And we all set up stalls, and we were involved in the whole conceptualization, and then what should be happening on all the 5 days of the millet mela and so on. Of course, we were kind of a little disappointed about the government was not really giving that much publicity to it. We thought that because when there's a horticulture or a flower show or something that they do, you will find that 2 weeks before the event there are all these billboards which show up in different parts of the city and all that. So there was nothing like that done for this. So we thought that maybe this may be a flop show, but there was such a good response. People were just coming and flocking the whole place, because there were also food stalls. I mean, that was our suggestion, that you don't have only the don't have only a sale of millets kind of a thing. Have food stalls. So Earth 360, Dinesh's group set up a food stall. Deccan Development Society set up a food stall, and they were like just so hugely popular that the government started repeating it actually every year. So now in their agriculture budget this year, they basically said that every year they will set aside money for doing this kind of a millet mela, and that was also a very good entry point for us, because now the agriculture minister had come for that inauguration of the thing. So then we actually made contacts with them as a follow-up discussion, because once the Department of Agriculture Ministry and also the Agriculture University get involved, then you can actually get official recommendations, that these are the crops which are actually really popular. Because the popular conception is basically that these millet crops are on their way out. Most farmers have stopped cultivating them. So most people have also stopped consuming them. So when there's interest from the consumer side, and when there's also interest from the farmer side, then the government has to basically take cognizance of that. So that whole connection we were able to do. So this whole work in Anantapur district. Yeah.
I just want to add one more thing to it. Ever since I came from background with farmers, but I've never done any farming. I went to farms only as a site visit, etc. But ever since I got involved in agriculture, we interacted with a few farmers in India, and they've always, what I learned is that they go to the local, what is the department called? There's an agriculture officer.
Yeah, extension officer.
Yeah, extension officer who's like every mandal is like the agriculture officer who gives recommendations. Sometimes they have fertilizers, their samples, so you give all that farmers. So farmers, they rely on, think of them as the experts. So next set of crops, recommendations, they go to him. Big farmers, they get samples, they go to him. So when the government is involved like this, I'm hoping that agriculture officer will include this in one of his recommendations.
Yeah. So in their whole training of agriculture extension officers, what should be doing this time? They prepare a contingency plan. Whenever there is a drought. So what should be done in the contingency plan? So we were basically able to influence all these things. So these are some photographs from the earlier work. This is Dinesh, who was an aide Sathi, and then he also got recognized with the Ashoka Fellowship. He is the one who's anchoring our efforts on millets in Anantapur district. So these are different advantages of millets to farmers, that that they are drought tolerant. They can grow even when the rains are delayed. See, often what happens is that these days, especially in the last few years, one manifestation of this whole climate change thing is that, are you able to read? I think there's too much light on it, right? Well,
the white is fine, but you can't read the just millet.
That's right. Yeah, I know that I recognize. Actually, the background changed, so I couldn't change that color. Okay. No, that's fine. I think we will just live with that. Yeah. So one of the manifestations of the climate change, that's happening, is that the whole monsoon pattern in India has, is really changing. It's really altering. So the crops that people used to grow, they had this set pattern that you sow in the middle of June, and then you give the first irrigation in the middle of July, and then if there are good rains in July and August, that means that your crop is going to sail through, and then you harvest now. So these days, June and July have almost become like summer months, basically. So this time there were good rains in June, but absolutely no rain in July. And from the middle of June to the end of July, absolutely no rain. So these kind of, in this change kind of pattern, basically we need crops which are resilient. which can actually adapt well even if you sow them late, which can adapt well even if there is some lean spell of monsoon. So that is where I think some of these crops which are tuned to, which have adapted over the centuries, to dryland conditions, they are actually, it makes more sense to grow these crops. So there is this millets.wordpress.com. It's a blog that Dinesh maintains on millets. So any of you for more information and updates, you can actually go to that. Yeah.
So I'm curious, these seem to have so much going for them. And I think the answer is in the last several decades. Why have they become unpopular? Is it just a consumer preference thing?
No, there are a whole bunch of factors. See, one thing is that the support systems that the government has developed, right, for farmers. See, agriculture anywhere, because it's such a mass scale operation, requires good support systems from the government. And the support systems have all been tuned basically to in the whole green revolution period, right, of Indian agriculture. The support system have always been.
Do people know green revolution? I mean, I did. When I didn't want it, but I didn't know.
Yeah. So green revolution is basically, I mean, everybody I think would have heard about the phrase green revolution, but what exactly it signifies is that in 1960s and 70s there was this huge emphasis on increasing food production to make India food self-sufficient, and this green revolution was basically an initiative to achieve that. But a lot of emphasis on that was basically increasing the rice and wheat production in India in a big way. And how to do that? Basically by, in some pockets, provide huge irrigation facilities and include that along with a package of fertilizers, usage of fertilizers, pesticide, basically a high input agriculture. High input agriculture with irrigation to raise the production. So that was the basic emphasis. So that was touted as one of the biggest triumphs of the Indian policy making and Indian agriculture and so on. So one of the fallout of the green revolution process is these kind of things. Basically, the emphasis on irrigated agriculture, high input, just rice and wheat, use of fertilizers and chemicals. The entire policy and support systems were tuned basically to promote that. Whereas all the other places where you cannot really sustainably grow either rice or wheat, there is no irrigation, and when there is no irrigation, you cannot actually also practice this high input agriculture. Use high use of fertilizer and pesticide and so on. So you actually need, for rain-fed areas, which are dryland areas, which are 60% of India's cultivated area, you basically have a whole different kind of a crop mix. So where diversity of cropping is important, where sustainable use of water is important, but because your support systems are all tuned to only certain crops, what has happened is that only for farmers large scale try to shift to only certain crops where the government is providing a support system. So which means that in Anantapur district there was a wholesale shift to groundnut. 95% of the entire Kharif area is planted with just groundnut. And year after year, if you are doing groundnut, then the soil becomes depleted, and also it's much more prone to failure, and it's basically all the things that come with just pure monocropping, right? Similarly, in other belts where farmers have actually dug bore wells, and wherever they strike water, they would get they would start growing paddy, but within 5 or 6 years the bore well would dry up. Then they are kind of back, basically 10 steps backward, right? Because they've moved away to crops which are not really sustainable, and then there was a whole spree of borewell, like in Chittoor district, for example, where we work. In one panchayat, there were 300 borewells which were dug, and at some point, maybe about half of them would have failed right at the beginning, half of them would have continued for 5-10 years and so on. Right now in that panchayat, only 2 borewells are really working. All the rest have dried up, but in the process what happened over a 20-year period is that the entire cropping pattern changed. So farmers would either cultivate rice or sugarcane, and many of them shifted to mango. But all the earlier crops which used to grow in a more sustainable way have disappeared. So this is the kind of pattern that has happened, and the same fate, with many of the millet crops. So now what has been happening in the last 5-6 years through these efforts is a revival of millet crop cultivation and many other dryland crops, basically pulses, oil seeds, different kinds of oil seeds, which are actually much more suitable for the dryland areas. I think this millets and what we have done to our own agriculture in the dryland areas, that is one aspect which kind of illustrates that how we grow our food, how we consume our food, and how we treat our land and water. These are all very profound questions, and I feel that actually these are some of the most important civilizational questions. It's not just a thing that agriculture is one sector and we are trying to work with farmers. Therefore, we have to think about these things. I think that if we think about human civilization, we should be able to recognize that these are some of the most important things, because I think one way which is evident in the last several years is this whole health crisis, right? The crisis with respect to so many people getting diabetes or obesity and all these things are finally linked with respect to how we consume our food. But beyond health, if you look at environment, if we are not cognizant of what are the kind of, what's the kind of impact on environment that our food has, all the food that we are consuming, basically we are going to end up in a situation where we are going to destroy our whole soil and water resources. In many of, almost I think 20 million hectares in India, there is a heavy water logging and salination. They are not suitable for cultivation because they're either heavily irrigated or irrigation plus heavy use of fertilizer. On the other hand, there are many places where you go 1,000 feet below, you still won't find groundwater. So this is the kind of crisis that we have put ourselves in, basically because we have completely lost the balance between balance of what kind of food we should be consuming and what kind of crops we should be growing and how our whole food system should be organized. And I'm not even getting into the whole issue of pesticides and all that right now, because I think that is another aspect why, that's another way of seeing how this is a civilizational question, because we have basically consistently built our food system in such a way that we poison our own food. If you look at it in terms of just biology, right? All species have basically evolved to recognize what kind of food is good for them, what kind of food is not good for them. A red berry, a squirrel can recognize what food is poisonous and what food is not poisonous. A worm can recognize what food is good and what food is not good. And whether some species survives in the evolution or not depends on whether they can actually recognize what food is good for them and not, and how to adapt to that. So human beings are the only species which poison our own food. Okay, so you can think about what is going to be the future of the human species. Systematically poison our food, both while growing using pesticides, and then because you want to consume all vegetables all around the year, it means that you have to put all the vegetables in cold storage. You have to put pesticides to actually prevent damage to the food during the storage. Basically, we are systematically poisoning our own food. So we can think about the future of human species. So I think that these are all very questions on which we all need to reflect a lot. So that is where our consumption patterns and what the farmers are growing, that interlinkage is very important. And I think lastly, we also need to think about how we treat people who grow our food. In many countries, the pattern has been of the modern development to say that farmers who cultivate food are really at the bottom of the food chain, right? So other people kind of gobble them up, and then other sectors gobble them up, and we end up in a situation where most of the agriculture is done by machines. In the US, about 1% of the 1% of the entire working population is engaged in agriculture. In Europe, it may be like 4 to 5%. Which means that basically machines and industrial form of agriculture has taken over. And here, even if you have a 50-acre or a 100-acre farm, you are considered as a small farmer, and you don't even have a way of selling your produce to any of the mainstream grocery stores, including things like Whole Food and Whole Foods Market and so on. You cannot sell to them even if you're growing organic food over a 100-acre farm, because they're all designed, their whole supply chain is designed to procure from much huge farms and much larger supply chain kind of giants. So this is the kind of state of agriculture here. So if we look at agriculture in India, I think that we have a opportunity to basically show a different way forward. I mean, that's a positive way that I would look at it. The fact that small farmer agriculture can be sustainable, and also both economically and ecologically, and we don't need to think that this kind of industrial scale farming is the only way out. I think to demonstrate that in a large enough scale, I think India is one of the places which can do that. So that's the reason why I think that our work in agriculture has a lot of profound significance. But if we look at how the farmers are doing now in India, I think a lot of us hear about farmer suicides happening when we talk about agriculture in India. One of the images that comes is about how farmers are in a crisis, and these are numbers from 2014. In Maharashtra, about 4,000 farmers committed suicide in 2014. In Telangana, about 1,500 farmers. In Andhra Pradesh, maybe 800, and so on. I think in many states actually this is happening. Even a state like Gujarat, which is touted as like a development miracle, farmers are committing suicide in large numbers. I think 600 or something last year. And so this kind of a crisis is actually quite widespread. So we, in our work in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, we have actually been looking at the farmer suicides issue very closely, and meeting the families of farmers who have committed suicide, trying to understand why it's actually what is pushing them to commit suicide, but also at the same time recognizing that actually many other farmers who are not in this situation, like that Allam Satyana is one farmer in Adilabad district, which is adjoining Maharashtra, northernmost district of Telangana, where I had visited these two families. This person owns 2 acres of land and took another 3 acres of land on lease and cultivated mostly cotton crop, and they had a debt of about 20,000 rupees from the previous year, and then next year he had taken a debt of another 50,000 rupees for cultivating in the current season, but the crop was a dismal failure. Normally if you can get about 4 to 5 quintals of crop per acre, you can just about break even or make a little bit of profit, okay? But from 5 acres he got only 1 quintal in the first flush, in the first time when they harvested. So you can just imagine the total heartbreak. So this person went and committed suicide. And similar stories of many other farmers. That's another farmer in Adilabad district, Mote Maruti. And yeah,
what was the expected, typically 5 acres of if you sow 5 acres, how much can you expect?
See, from 1 acre, 4 to 5 quintals.
Oh, wow.
Is what would keep you just above the water. I mean, if you get even 2 to 3 quintals, you may be making a loss, but at least you're okay. But 5 quintals is what is required to actually for you to start making some profit from 1 acre. But he got only 1 quintal from 5 acres. So that's the kind of situation that is there with cotton cultivation in many of the areas. BT cotton, which is touted as a huge success and so on. But I think economically speaking, the thing to note is basically that 70,000 rupees was the debt, of the farmer, which is, just about $1,000. Basically, we are talking about people who have a $1,000 to $2,000 debt, who, find it so overwhelming, to kind of repay the debt, that they are actually committing suicide. So I think that is something that all of us should think about, that people are really living at such margins, and that is where I think that our role also becomes important. How we can actually make an impact and make a difference to the farmers in India.
I have a small question, Kiran.
Yeah.
This debt, if the farmer commits suicide, does it pass to the children or no?
See, different governments are dealing with it in different ways, but for example, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, there is a government order which says that any farmer suicide family which the government recognizes as a genuine farmer, see, they have some 13 criteria, okay, to even recognize that this suicide has happened due to the farming reasons, and not because this person had some personal problem or a failure of marriage or something like that. So they tend to paint many of the farmer suicides as happening due to personal reasons, not for the farming reasons. But if the government does actually officially recognize them as farmer suicide, then they will give 1 lakh rupees to the family as an ex gratia, to help the family, and then 50,000 rupees as a loan settlement kind of a thing. So they use that 50,000 rupees to settle all their loans so that the family doesn't have the debt burden. So they have something like that. But unfortunately, what has happened is that only 10 to 15% of the farmer suicide families are actually being recognized as official. So this has been one of our battles. Like we did, for example, when the government is taking a stand like this, then we would do a fact-finding visits of, let's say, we pick 100 farmer suicide families, who have committed suicide as per news reports in this particular month, and then we would visit each and every one of them and then compile the reports of what are the reasons which made them commit suicide, and then we produced a report of that and released it and said that out of these 100 families, 99 families are out of the 100 news reported families, 99 of them have committed suicide because of these farming reasons, either loan or failure of their bore well or things like that, crop failure. So that is when the other groups also started putting pressure on the government to start recognizing them. So this is the kind of battle that is there, and what is causing the crisis, basically the economics is of this high input agriculture really increasing the cost and not getting enough price, sufficient price for their produce, and any of the situations of drought or flood or any natural disaster that happens which impacts the production, there is no effective way of actually having a crop insurance or a disaster compensation which can help the farmers get out of the situation. So if you have at least 2 consecutive years of failure of crop, then basically you are totally pushed over the edge. So that's the kind of situation that is happening. So partly it is a result of unsustainable practices in agriculture, but partly it is a failure of the government policy to provide enough support systems for the farmers. See, essentially, farmers are the largest category of entrepreneurs, in India. Each of them is actually investing their own money and putting in a lot of hard labor, and taking care of like some 30-40 different variables, starting from the rains to pest attacks to whole soil conditions. So it is like such a huge management problem that they're actually solving, and they're really good at it, doing it. But just like our Prime Minister would come to the Silicon Valley and have meetings with huge companies here, saying that we will provide a good atmosphere for you guys to come and make an investment. We will actually basically the investment atmosphere, right? And we will actually design our systems in such a way that we'll provide you incentives for doing this. We'll in case you don't, like in Telangana, for example, the Chief Minister declared in their industrial policy that you come and apply for a permit. Within 15 days, if you're, if you don't get a response, you automatically assume that you got a permit and you can start setting up an industry. This is what the industrial policy says. And if you they encourage banks to give credit to all these companies which are coming and setting up investments, saying that if the government will stand as a counter guarantee. If if some industry fails and they are not able to repay the loan back to you, the government will stand as counter guarantee. So our question is basically that unless this kind of support systems are provided, even the biggest and the richest corporations are not ready to come and invest, and then the government is recognizing that. But for the farmers who are also entrepreneurs, who are producing food, who are really producing things without which the entire Indian population cannot survive, you are not actually providing those kind of support systems which will that enabling environment which is there. So that is basically the failure of the whole government policies that are there, which has resulted in this kind of a crisis. And also there is a policy thinking that most people should be pushed out of agriculture and then they should find jobs elsewhere. But if you look at the jobs creation outside agriculture, it has actually been very dismal. I don't have the graph right in this presentation, but in India, if you take the 5-year period from 2004 to 2009, where the there's this 9% growth and the boom period and so on, actually very few jobs were really created. Net new employment generated was only 3 million. Only 3 million net new employment was generated in a 5-year period, where 55 million new people joined the working population. So the working population grew by 55 million, you only created 3 million new net jobs. And this is during the 2004 to 9 period, where there was 9% growth and the boom and so on. And most of the new employment, actually agriculture employment reduced by 15 million. So many people moving out of agriculture. Manufacturing employment reduced by 2%. Services, all the software industry and everything falls under services, reduced by 0.7%. And the only sector which really grew is actually the construction sector, which grew by 26%. So that is why you actually have some 26 million got absorbed in the construction industry, which basically means people working in dismal conditions, doing hard labor on construction projects, on brick kilns, and things like this. All this comes under the construction industry. So the people who are actually being forced out of agriculture, they are not really going into occupations which will give them a better income or a more secure kind of livelihood or a more dignified livelihood, but actually they are being pushed out because they have no other choice. So this kind of a distressed migration is actually what is happening. I mean, that is what is behind the crisis in agriculture. So what we are basically saying is that it is good, if there are good jobs created in other sectors, and then people who are doing in farming now, if some of them or their children want to migrate, go and take up other jobs, that is all well and fine. But until they find better opportunities in other sectors, we do not want the government policies to actually push push people out of agriculture, through this kind of a distressed migration. So some of the, so what is the way out, right? So some of the works that we've been involved in is sustainable agriculture work. We talked about the millets work, which is actually providing better livelihoods for farmers in Anantapur district. Similarly, we support sustainable agriculture work in other places. So this is basically at a micro level. You can create initiatives where the farmers are able to make better income because they are using a less inputs in their agriculture. And these are some examples. This is actually in Vidarbha region in Maharashtra. A farmer family who used to make about a loss of 1,500 rupees for 3 years. Once they shifted to this sustainable way of agriculture, they are now making income of about 24,000 rupees. They have just 1 hectare of land.
How did you pick these guys? That particular family.
Yeah.
How do they get to qualify? Because there's obviously so many of them who could benefit from this.
Yeah, actually, see, it is, we make it open to everybody, to all farmers to come and participate in this. What it involves is basically for farmers to change their practices, from this heavy chemical-based thing to the sustainable agriculture. So that it requires quite some effort from the farmer side, also to make the change. So the farmers who are more willing or more enterprising, there's almost like a self-selection, that happens when people come into the program. So typically when we are working in the Andhra Pradesh, sustainable agriculture program, in each village about 50 farmers would come forward, in our first meeting. But maybe 20 of them will really stick on and follow the practices. It is not a restriction from our side, it's actually self-selection.
Won't the others quickly follow?
Yeah, that does happen, but it is not it is not something that you do in one village or you do with 20 farmers and it catches like a wildfire. Basically, that is where we also need to develop some support systems, from the side of the government or through a private initiative to help them do the transition. Basically, transition from the chemical agriculture to sustainable agriculture would take about 3 to 4 years, during which time actually there needs to be a good support system for them to do the transition. Secondly, they also need to have a good system of marketing, which actually becomes an incentive for other people to do that. So one of the things that we are doing is actually formation of cooperatives of farmers who are practicing organic agriculture and help in the marketing of the produce. So that is actually attracting more farmers to come and join. So lot of our work in the last few years has been with Raitu Swarajya Vedika. It's a broad platform that we initiated in 2010 in Andhra Pradesh, and now we have 2 states, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Which through which we've been able to actually push the government to make both policy changes as well as implement their existing policies well. So we are working at a at a higher level, at a state level, basically influencing the state level political leaders as well as media as well as farmers unions to take some of these things onto their agenda. Basically recognize that there's an agrarian crisis, recognize that there is a change in cropping pattern that needs to be brought about, recognize that we need better budgetary allocations for farmers, so we need a separate agriculture budget. So these are some of the things that we have been doing, and also finding that tenant farmers are in a much much worse shape than other farmers, so we need to actually make systems to enable the tenant farmers also to get loans and crop insurance and all these things. So these are the kind of things on which we've been doing advocacy work, and that has actually really created a environment in AP and Telangana where most of the farmers' issues have come to the top of the political agenda. So in the last elections, for example, addressing the agrarian crisis became a top agenda for many of the political parties. Of course, the way that they've done it is not the best way. Basically, they've announced a loan waiver to all the farmers, which we don't think is the best sustainable way of doing it. But they've also announced many other initiatives, like providing water facilities for the dryland areas. So the entire Telangana, basically, they have now a large program for tank revival. Revival of irrigation tanks, which used to be the source of irrigation and also to a way of replenishing the groundwater level over the past few centuries, which have gone completely into disuse. So there's a huge program actually to revive the tanks in Telangana. So basically the focus on agriculture and making farming more viable, we've been able to bring that into the discourse, and that is really helping in taking things forward. So I think I won't go into too much details here. I mean, this actually I wanted to tell about one example of how we've been able to make a progress on tenant farmers issues. But we've already seen, the example of how we were able to bring millets, back onto the agenda of the, larger state government. Similarly, this issue of landless tenant farmers who lease other people's lands, they're not getting bank loans and they're not getting crop insurance and disaster compensation. That's another big issue which is there, on which we were able to actually make progress. So about 25,000, see last year actually this loan eligibility cards which are given to tenant farmers, 0 cards were issued, last year. But through our advocacy work, about 25,000 cards were issued this year. And next year we have set a target that 2 lakh tenant farmers, 200,000 tenant farmers should be issued these loan eligibility cards, basically which will enable them to go to a bank, get a loan, and not fall into the debt trap, not fall into the clutches of the money lenders for getting loans. And where they can also, if their crop fails, they can get disaster compensation and so on. So this is one of our focus areas that we are working. I mean, just if you want to look at impact, I think that just 25,000 farmers getting these cards means that about 21 crores of farm loans, basically, or 2.1 million, 21 crores, that's about 210 million rupees of loans that the farmers are able to get, from banks, which otherwise they would have basically been at the mercy of the money lenders. So this is the kind of impact that we can make through advocacy efforts. I think the point, I just wanted to end with the point that Murthy was making, that many of our efforts are tuned to actually bringing about a larger systemic change and not only micro level initiatives. So basically how we are able to marry micro level initiatives with larger systemic and policy level change. So that's the kind of spectrum of things on which aid is working in agriculture.
I have a question. This when you said this spreading macro level, are you talking about Telangana and Andhra Pradesh or India?
Talking about Telangana and Andhra Pradesh mainly, I mean our direct effort has been focused there. So we also have we also have a large network working across the country, which is called Kisan Swaraj. And there are other initiatives that we are also part of, like a Jai Kisan Andolan that's happening, around the country and so on. So there are advocacy efforts happening both at the national level and at the state level. But I think we've been able to make more focused impact, at the state level through our direct action.
So Telangana and Andhra Pradesh could stand as an example, if I may use that word, to other places who are suffering from soil degradation and farmer problems.
Yeah, in some ways. See, I'm not saying that we've been able to address the entire environmental issue of agriculture in a big way.
Statistics that show that improvement.
That's definitely pesticide usage. Like if you look at pesticide usage,
yes.
In Andhra Pradesh, the pesticide usage has fallen by 50%. 50% in the last 10 years. Yeah. Basically, if you compare from 2002 to 2012, official figures of the government, whereas in no other state actually pesticide usage has fallen.
So the corporations are not gunning for you?
Huh? Not really. I think that we've been able to create enough political will even within the system that working through women's self-help groups, and there's actually an official government program called Community Managed Sustainable Agriculture in Andhra Pradesh.
By government you mean the state government?
By the state government, which is talking about these things. So we've been able to mainstream some of these ideas. Like, so if you look at the government posters and the pamphlets that the government itself makes to distribute to the farmers, right? They talk about reducing the use of pesticides. They talk about using organic fertilizer. They talk about growing a diversity of crops and so on. So through that kind of both infiltration and also directly influencing their thinking. So that kind of a change has been possible. Yeah. So I just wanted to end with the third dimension of our work, which is basically to encourage citizen involvement in the farming issues. That people who are living in urban areas or anywhere basically need to feel connected, that there's this huge issue that is going on with farmers in the in the rural areas, and we all need to connect to that, because I think most of the people, many of the people who I was talking to here also were saying that we are connected to a farming family. Our family is also involved in agriculture in some way or the other. But that connection between farming and people in urban areas has become much more tenuous in the last couple of decades. So we are trying to actually bring back those linkages. So because this whole farmer suicide situation has become acute in Telangana, we've actually called for a huge campaign of citizen involvement, where people from colleges and schools are also going to the villages, connecting to the people, because this is the second successive drought season. How people can actually help or provide some basic support to farmers, and also mobilize the government to take action. Last year, for example, the government did not even declare a drought. though it was a drought season, little bit better than this year, but still equally bad. Almost 30% deficit in rainfall in most of the places in Telangana. Still, the government didn't even declare the drought because, I don't know for what reason. But essentially, they were like totally negligent about farmers who were suffering from drought. But this year, such a hue and cry has been made about it that the government cannot take that kind of a stand. This is the kind of mobilization that we've been doing, both for advocacy work to influence the government as well as changing the people's perception regarding farming crisis and agriculture issues.
It makes sense to try to connect some of these farmers through like the Kiva system or whatever. So, at an individual level, they can try to.
I think so. See, I think we should explore some things like that. See, especially these tenant farmers. Let's say I was actually talking to somebody else also who had suggested something like this. So I think definitely forming tenant farmers into cooperatives or joint liability groups is something that we are working on. So that can be linked, through this Kiva kind of system for people to, support maybe a group of farmers or even, to support one tenant farmer. How much resources would be required, to form them into a group and so on. Yeah, I think we should try something like that.
What are the challenges you are facing? Right? Of course, there's when the process takes a long time, right? Change of process in our work life, it takes a long time. It is a new development process and it takes, expected it takes 6 months for adoption. The process here, that takes a long time. What are the other kind of challenges? For example, are there farmers who tried this and went back to traditional farming for whatever reason? I'm sure there are. If so, what are the reasons why they're doing that?
So 2 questions, right? See,
Several questions.
yeah. See, farmers, going back to sustainable agriculture, we actually don't think of it as going back, in the sense that we are not saying that, if you just turn the clock back to 50 years ago, then everything will be better than what it is now. Because there have also been a lot of improvements. I think that the most, some of the best innovations in agriculture which have happened in India are in sustainable agriculture and organic farming. So actually, it is, it is going forward to better practice of sustainable agriculture, which make things more productive both in terms of yield as well as in terms of how to protect the environment. So once we start looking at it in those terms, actually a lot of farmers also have started coming forward, because at least this awareness about that the current model of keeping on using more and more fertilizer, more and more pesticide is not working. I think that consciousness has become much broader. But how we can get out of it, they basically feel like Abhimanyu in a Chakravyuha kind of thing. Right? I mean, you have entered, but you cannot come out. So you have to keep going deeper and deeper into that. So that's the kind of dynamic that you can actually get out, is the thing that we are trying to create.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, to clarify my question. My question is not that. My question is, so I mean, they say there are 20,000 tons or something that we did in Kurnool area, right? So several farmers across villages were doing this. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think at least some of them haven't continued it over the next years. Is that a fact, or is it, am I assuming? Some of them?
No, some of them may not have continued.
So people who haven't continued, what are the reasons why they have not continued that we know of? And if that's a challenge, is that a challenge? If there's a challenge, how do we plan to overcome that?
See, as far as millet cultivation is concerned, right, getting a good yield for the millet crop is a challenge. Compared to, let's say, paddy and irrigated paddy, the kind of yield that you get, compare that to the yield that a unirrigated millet crop will get, there is a big difference. How much net income you will be able to make, right? So that's the bottom line that the farmers will be looking at. So one of the challenges is actually to see what happens is, like in 2009 when we did this millet thing, and also over the years when we work with millet farmers, what happens is that if the farmer is not really confident that they can grow this millet crop successfully, and make money out of that, what they would end up doing is basically that if they have, let us say, 4 or 5 acres of land, on the worst piece of the land, they'll grow the millet. The best piece of land, they would grow groundnut, because they see groundnut as a commercial crop. So I want to invest some money in this. I want to put my best land to groundnut. Whereas some of the things where the soil is weak, or where it's more stony, or where the where the slope is such that the soil gets washed off. So those are the kind of things where they would grow millet. So that, but once they see that actually some other farmers, when they grow millet in good land, they are actually getting a good yield. Actually, people do get a positive feedback to shift. But see, people are mainly driven by their short-term economic interest. So that is basically the biggest challenge.
So how do the way you're describing the problem, like if the adoption grows mass, automatically these things like this, they'll be overcome. If the adoption is en masse, then they start to put it in the best part of the farm. So the aliens, they get good yield.
That's right.
So it seems that is that what we see as the main problem?
Yeah. And
can you give some numbers here? How much money does a farmer make with 1 acre of paddy versus 1 acre of?
I think there's one example that we had in there, right?
No, I don't have it on a slide here. See, one of the good things which has been happening through this whole millet promotion, and there is certainly an upward curve for millet. I'm not saying that it is at a sufficient level, but there's certainly an upward curve for millet, both at a consumption level as well as a farmer growing level. One of the upshots of that has been that actually the price for millets has gone up. For Korra and Sama and all these things, it's become almost double as what it was, just 5 years ago. So the economics also that way, it has been improving. If we take a farmer who's growing foxtail millet, right? In 1 acre of land, let's say they can grow 6 quintals, which is a decent crop. It is not bad, it's not very good. There are farmers who can grow 10 quintals also. So 6 quintals, and now the price that they are getting is 2,000 rupees per quintal, which is actually more than what you would get for paddy. Right? So 6 quintals and 2,000 rupees, that's about 12,000 rupees. So their expense on doing that cultivation in 1 acre of land would be somewhere like 5,000 rupees. So about 7,000 rupees per acre is what they can make in a growing foxtail millet. I'm talking about just an average decent yields kind of a thing. But typically in Anantapur, basically people have larger land holdings. So you're talking about if there's a 5 acre of land, you may get about 40,000 rupees from 5 acres. That is in one season. In the other season, if you also can grow some other crop, then you will get a little more. That's the kind of thing. But if you have paddy, right? Yeah. So no, if you have paddy, basically there are only 5% of lands in Anantapur where you can even think of growing paddy. But even if you want to do the comparison, right? Paddy, I think 1 acre of paddy, you can get about 20 quintals of paddy. But the input cost also per acre of paddy is about 20,000 rupees. Yeah. So if you get 20 quintals, and then if you're talking about 1,500 rupees or something, right? You basically get 30,000 rupees if you get a decent, not even 1,500. I think you'll get only. So about 28,000 rupees you will get, and but your input cost will be about 20,000 rupees. So that's the kind of situation that is there, with respect to paddy. So in that way, actually, it is quite comparable, I would say. If you get this yield of about decent yield of about 6,000 rupees, but the assured market, the fact that if you grow paddy, then the government itself will buy your paddy, at a certain assured price. See, those are the kind of support systems which are not there for people.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. We only have 10 minutes, and then we need to